What if the NFL's biggest problem isn't the quarterbacks, the offensive lines, or even the schemes drawn up on Sunday afternoons? What if the real issue is the very people trusted to lead these players? The ones who make or break careers long before we see the results on TV. That's exactly the storm brewing right now in Cleveland. And it's one that has put young quarterback Shedeur Sanders at the center of a battle he never asked for. The battle between talent that demands opportunity and a system often designed to hold that talent back. When you think of player evaluation in the NFL, the process seems brutally transparent. Every pass, every snap, every decision is broken down by analysts, scouts, and fans. Grading systems like PFF assign a weekly report card, and talk shows delight in ranking players from number 1 to number 32. Quarterbacks, especially rookies, live under a microscope. They're celebrated for one big throw and dismissed after one bad interception. Confidence can be destroyed in a single drive. But here's the side fans don't always see. Coaches aren't ranked, graded, or held under anything close to the same relentless spotlight. Quarterbacks are publicly eviscerated every Monday, while coordinators and position coaches, the very people molding those quarterbacks, slip under the radar. And when Tom Brady, arguably the greatest quarterback to ever play the position, points this out with open frustration, it forces you to stop and think. If the GOAT is saying that quarterback development in the NFL is broken, maybe it's time we pay attention. Brady's blunt critique focused on the reality that many organizations are simply not equipped to nurture young quarterbacks properly. In his words, "You're assuming everybody knows how to develop a quarterback." Quarterbacks, especially rookies, live under a microscope. They're celebrated for one big throw and dismissed after one bad interception. Confidence can be destroyed in a single drive. But here's the side fans don't always see. Coaches aren't ranked, graded, or held under anything close to the same relentless spotlight. Quarterbacks are publicly eviscerated every Monday, while coordinators and position coaches, the very people molding those quarterbacks, slip under the radar. And when Tom Brady, arguably the greatest quarterback to ever play the position, points this out with open frustration, it forces you to stop and think. If the GOAT is saying that quarterback development in the NFL is broken, maybe it's time we pay attention. Brady's blunt critique focused on the reality that many organizations are simply not equipped to nurture young quarterbacks properly. In his words, "You're assuming everybody knows how to develop a quarterback." But according to him, that assumption is flat out wrong. There are coaches calling plays right now in professional locker rooms who simply don't know what they're doing when it comes to preparing a quarterback. Imagine being drafted, fighting for your dream job, and being told you're not good enough, only to discover the very people coaching you may not even understand how to maximize your skill set. And this is where Sanders got it all figured out? Situation becomes more than just another rookie story. Critics inside and outside Cleveland have raised eyebrows at how the coaching staff has handled him. Instead of gradually building him into the system, giving him consistent reps with the starters, and providing developmental guidance, Sanders was left on the sidelines. No first-team reps, no chemistry with the core offensive unit, and then, suddenly, thrust into the starting lineup. It was the NFL equivalent of being handed the keys to a car you've never driven, told to win a race, and then blamed when you crash. Stephen A. Smith, never one to mince words, called it directly, a setup for failure. His take echoed what many fans were already thinking, that Sanders wasn't just fighting an uphill climb. He was walking into a trap laid by those who should have been preparing him to succeed. Louis Riddick added another crucial perspective. Quarterbacks drafted lower don't survive without advocates. Someone inside the building has to fight for them, to argue for reps, to champion their potential, to demand that they aren't forgotten in the shuffle. And in Sanders' case, nobody could point to a single advocate willing to put their credibility on the line for him. The result is a situation that feels less like a football development plan and more like organizational negligence. Worse yet, ownership doesn't appear to be steering the ship. When Browns owner Jimmy Haslam openly admitted he had nothing to do with signing Sanders and was just leaving it to the staff, it sent a chilling message. There was no grand vision, no commitment, no clarity about the quarterback's future. Sanders had been tossed into the system without even knowing if anyone in power actually wanted him there. And that's why this story matters far beyond Cleveland's walls. This isn't about one rookie competing for minutes. It's about whether the NFL itself is failing young quarterbacks by holding players accountable for every misstep, while letting coaches and executives operate with blurry accountability. Brady's comparison, that head coaches are often PE teachers elevated into CEOs, it was his way of pulling back the curtain on a truth players whisper but rarely say aloud. Too many locker rooms are guided by people who don't have the expertise or vision to nurture the very players they're supposed to lead. So when Sanders takes the field, what we're watching isn't just a game of football. You're watching a young quarterback fight against two opponents, the defenses lined up across from him, and the system within his own organization, seemingly designed to cage him in before he can even show what he's capable of. And here's the twist. This problem isn't likely to go away after one player, one season, or even one controversy. Because the more quarterbacks like Sanders emerge, the more glaring the question becomes. Can anyone truly thrive in a system where players are put under the microscope but coaches escape accountability? That's the question Brady raised. That's the frustration Riddick voiced. That's the warning Stephen A. drove home. And now, it's the question hanging directly over Sanders' career. When Tom Brady speaks, the NFL listens. This isn't just another former player offering casual studio banter. This is the quarterback who built a two-decade dynasty in New England, conquered new territory in Tampa Bay, and left the game with more rings than any player in history. His words don't float. They land like hammer strikes. And so when Brady turned his focus away from players and directly onto coaches, the echo was deafening. His frustration was simple, but devastating in its logic. How is it that quarterbacks are scrutinized on every throw, studied by analytics wonks on every Monday, and roasted by fans every Sunday night, while the coaches tasked with developing them escape similar accountability? Players are ranked from 1 to 32, their weaknesses broadcast on highlight shows. But who ranks the quarterback coaches? Who evaluates the offensive coordinators tasked with shaping these critical careers? By Brady's count, many simply aren't up to the job. Think about the contradiction here. A quarterback like Shedeur Sanders comes into the NFL system with limited reps, raw talent, and huge expectations. Every move he makes is documented, debated, and graded. If he misses a throw in his first few starts, he's instantly labeled not ready, not good enough, maybe even a bust. But the position coach who skipped reps with him in practice, or the coordinator who designed a playbook that doesn't fit his strengths, faces no public repercussion. They keep their jobs, their reputations intact, while the player gets buried beneath the narrative. Brady didn't pull his punches in describing this imbalance. He compared certain head coaches and coordinators to PE teachers suddenly promoted to CEOs. In other words, many of them are great at organization or motivation, but completely out of their depth when it comes to quarterback development. And that, he argued, is why so many promising young players stall out. It's not that the athletes don't have the talent, it's that the organizations don't have the knowledge or infrastructure to actually build them into stars. This was not an abstract critique either. It was a direct line to Sanders' situation. Here was a quarterback clearly in need of structured coaching, in need of steady preparation, and instead, he was shuffled around the depth chart with no first-team work. And when he finally got thrown into the starting lineup, The judgments were immediate. He's not the guy. He doesn't have it. Entire careers can be derailed by these snap conclusions, all because the groundwork wasn't laid properly in practice. The sting in Brady's words is how easily they cut through excuses. Teams talk constantly about the process and development. But what Brady pointed out is that a disturbing number of coaches don't actually know how to develop a quarterback, beyond offering cliches and conservative schemes. The result? Talented young players like Sanders are judged under the brightest lights without anyone acknowledging how dimly those players had been supported on the practice field. And if Brady's comments hadn't already lit a fire under the league, his timing certainly did. The remarks came while Sanders' storyline was already being debated in Cleveland. Watching the greatest quarterback in history publicly call out the very system Sanders found himself trapped inside gave the controversy its defining headline. It wasn't just analysts or fans complaining anymore. The GOAT was saying outright, "This problem is systemic." The ripple effect was immediate. Suddenly, sports talk segments weren't just showing clips of Sanders' throws. They were quoting Brady's words. Headlines shifted from, "Can Sanders play?" to "Is coaching the NFL's biggest problem?" On forums and comment sections, fans echoed Brady's sentiment. If players are numbers on a chart, shouldn't coaches be as well? Shouldn't there be public accountability for those who pull strings behind the curtain? That idea alone reframed Sanders' struggles. Instead of being one rookie fumbling against bad odds, his experience became Exhibit A in Brady's larger argument. Here you had a quarterback held to impossible standards while being denied the reps and advocacy that make those standards achievable. It turned his story from individual failure into collective failure. And collective failure, as Brady made clear, is harder to excuse away. And that's what makes this critique so powerful. Brady didn't say coaches shouldn't be respected. He said respect needs to be earned the same way players earn it. With results, with measurable progress, with proof that they can elevate talent instead of suffocate it. That's a message every player fighting against the system needed to hear. And a message Cleveland staff probably wished he hadn't delivered with such precision. So the question lingers. If Tom Brady, who mastered the art of quarterbacking, insists that coaching quality is the silent killer of young talent, how long can the NFL ignore it? And more urgently, how can Sanders survive in a system Brady himself has just exposed as broken? Every quarterback wants the chance to prove himself. That's the bare minimum. Reps with starters, opportunities in practice, live snaps to build chemistry and timing. But for Shedeur Sanders, those chances remained shockingly rare. And that's exactly why Stephen A. Smith zeroed in on Cleveland's handling of him, torching the coaching staff with one of his signature on-air tirades. His indictment? This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't growing pains. This was a setup for failure. Think about it. Sanders had scraped through week after week of training camp, spending his time working with the third unit, not the first. He was fourth on the depth chart, buried so deep the spotlight never touched him. 11 practices passed, with not a single rep surrounded by the starters. Not one afternoon throwing to the team's star receivers. Not one chance to work behind the starting offensive line. Then, suddenly, out of nowhere, the staff tapped him for a starting preseason role. No rhythm, no familiarity, no safety net. That's not development. That's a trap. Stephen A. didn't mince words. On air, he declared what fans already suspected. You don't take a quarterback who hasn't worked with the first team, toss him cold into a starting lineup, and expect brilliance. And if he struggles, what then? The headlines write themselves. Not ready, not talented enough. The young player shoulders the blame, while the staff shrugs and calls it evaluation. In reality, it's sabotage packaged as opportunity. His point resonated because fans could see the unfairness stitched into the very process. How can a quarterback possibly look comfortable when the huddle around him is full of players he's barely seen before? How can he build timing with his receivers when those reps were never allowed? Stephen A. raised the uncomfortable truth. By the time Sanders actually got his shot, the script had already been written against him. And here's the sharp edge of this accusation. This wasn't the first time. Analysts reminded everyone watching that other players had been mismanaged in eerily similar ways, kept off the field until their debut became a sink-or-swim moment engineered under impossible conditions. Sanders was just the latest example in a pattern of rookies fed to the wolves only to be branded unfit afterward. As Stephen A. thundered, "Something's not adding up here." But while Stephen A. supplied the fire, the evidence already existed. Louis Riddick, often calmer but equally cutting, explained that quarterbacks taken later in the draft rarely get a fair shake without someone inside the building fighting for them. "You need an advocate," he said, "someone pulling for you in meetings, someone demanding you get the reps." Sanders, as everyone quickly realized, had no such advocate. Which begs the question, was that by accident or by design? The timing only made it worse. His first preseason start didn't just arrive in a vacuum. It came after months of being sidelined, after rumors swirled about the staff doubting his potential, after whispers that his addition to the roster wasn't even a unified decision from the front office. To many watching, it no longer looked like cautious development. It looked like a deliberate test rigged to prove what the coaches already wanted to believe, and that's the cruelest twist. Because when Sanders did take the field, expectations rose sky high. Fans were desperate to see the flashes of talent they'd been promised. Critics waited with sharpened pencils to pounce on every mistake. Yet very few stopped to acknowledge the obvious, that no matter how prepared Sanders was personally, no quarterback succeeds in a situation where the deck is stacked from the outset. This is why Stephen A.'s phrase, "set up for failure," thundered so loudly across every sports channel and online forum. It cut through excuses, exposed the imbalance, and framed the moment not as a player's weakness, but as an organizational failure. Sanders didn't stumble into a bad debut. He was pushed into it without the foundation any quarterback requires. And if fans were angry about his missed opportunities, imagine how teammates felt. Offensive players quietly admitted what outsiders already suspected. You can't build trust with a leader you've barely shared a practice with. Trust is forged in the grind of camp, in the rhythm of countless snaps. Without that, a quarterback isn't just fighting defenses. He's fighting unfamiliarity inside his own huddle. It was unfair from the start, and everyone knew it. So where Brady pointed at systemic coaching flaws, Stephen A. put a magnifying glass directly on Cleveland's mishandling of Sanders. Together, the message became unavoidable. This wasn't just incompetence. This was for Riddick. The problem wasn't just about optics or vague feelings of unfairness. It was about process. The nuts and bolts of how a team develops its quarterbacks. His view was simple. You cannot expect a young passer, especially one drafted lower on the board, to survive without consistent reps and an internal advocate fighting for him. Those two things, repetitions and advocacy, are oxygen for developing quarterbacks. Without them, the flame flickers and dies. Sanders, according to Riddick, had been starved of both. Start with the reps. As Riddick emphasized, Sanders entered the preseason with barely a whisper of first-team snaps. Nearly every practice left him cycling through third-unit reads, throwing to receivers who might not even make the roster, standing behind linemen who'd be cut within weeks. When you spend your days running plays designed for evaluation rather than growth, you're not building chemistry, you're filling space. So when Sanders was suddenly thrown into the spotlight as a starter, he wasn't just underprepared. He was placed in a no-win scenario. Riddick noted the obvious but often ignored point. Quarterbacks don't succeed in isolation. Timing, rhythm, and trust with receivers can look invisible to the casual fan, but they separate a nearly completed pass from an interception. Without first-team reps, Sanders was essentially a stranger in his own offense. Putting him into a starting role under those conditions wasn't just negligent, it actively undermined his chances to showcase potential. Then came the issue of advocacy, which Riddick hammered home with unusual intensity. "You need someone in that building," he explained, voice raised in meetings, pounding the table for you. Draft position matters, yes, but more important in the NFL's political landscape is who within the organization truly believes in you. Was it the GM? A coordinator? A position coach? Riddick's frustration boiled when he asked a critical question Cleveland could never clearly answer. Who even wanted Sanders in the first place? That uncertainty was damning. Jimmy Haslam himself admitted publicly that he had no direct role in Sanders' signing, shrugging responsibility off onto the coaching staff. That meant two alarming possibilities. Either Sanders entered with no champion backing him, or worse, he entered with active resistance from multiple corners of the organization. For a young quarterback trying to establish his footing, both are fatal scenarios. Without advocacy, every mistake is magnified, every decision to withhold reps goes unchallenged, and every opinion about your trajectory leans negative by default. Riddick's tone grew sharper when he contrasted Sanders' case with more established quarterbacks. Players selected in earlier rounds often arrive with built-in protection. Coaches are pressured to justify the draft capital spent, so they get extra reps, longer leashes, and tailored schemes focused on their strengths. Sanders, on the other hand, had none of that insulation. No mandate to play, no investment demanding patience. He was disposable in the eyes of the system, the very definition of vulnerable. But what made Riddick's perspective so cutting wasn't just his breakdown of reps and advocacy. It was his insistence that this wasn't about Sanders alone. It was about the careless architecture of quarterback development across the league. The Browns' mishandling of Sanders became the perfect case study. A talented young passer undermined not because of ability, but because of an absence of structure, vision, and accountability above him. In Riddick's words, it wasn't just bad luck. It was organizational malpractice. That phrase echoed malpractice. While Brady had leveled his criticisms broadly and Stephen A. turned it into headlines of fiery outrage, Riddick attached the language of professionalism, the kind of term that sticks in boardrooms long after a show ends. Malpractice implies negligence, an avoidable failure stemming not from complexity, but from carelessness and disregard. For Cleveland, that word dug deep because it pointed away from Sanders' struggles and directly toward their own. And this is where Riddick's calm but blunt style carried real weight. Fans tuning in may nod along with Stephen A.'s fire or tweet Brady quotes, but when Riddick outlined how quarterback development should look and then compared it with how Sanders' path was mismanaged, it was impossible to dismiss. He painted a clear picture. Here was a player drafted into a fog. Nobody seemed to know who vouched for him. Nobody fought to get him the reps he needed. Nobody ensured he wasn't being set up as expendable. And when his shot finally came, it happened under conditions designed to confirm doubts rather than reveal potential. By the time Riddick finished, the image was unmistakable. Sanders wasn't just failing to thrive. He was being institutionalized into failure by a system more interested in protecting itself than nurturing its players. And that truth raised the unavoidable question, if this is how Sanders was treated? How many other young quarterbacks have disappeared into the league's machinery, written off as not good enough, when, in reality, the system never gave them a fair chance? If Tom Brady's critique shook the coaching world, and Stephen A. plus Louis Riddick tore into the Cleveland staff, then Jimmy Haslam's comments almost detonated the entire franchise narrative in one sentence. Because when the owner of a team admits openly, unapologetically, that he had nothing to do with signing a quarterback now embroiled in controversy, what he's really admitting is that the franchise itself operates without a compass. And in Sanders' case, it meant his very presence in Cleveland was built on shaky, perhaps even non-existent foundations. Picture this. While talking casually about roster moves, Haslam explained that he hadn't been personally involved in the decision to bring Sanders aboard. He left it entirely to the coaching staff. On the surface, it might sound like delegation, the way a CEO empowers department heads. But in the brutal, high-stakes NFL, that type of shrugging detachment doesn't translate to empowerment. It translates into negligence. Because if ownership doesn't even know who in their house believed in a player, what real chance does that player have to succeed? Riddick had already raged at the mystery of Sanders' signing. No clear advocate, no champion inside the walls fighting for his reps. Haslam all but confirmed it. Sanders entered the Browns' ecosystem without any established protection from above. Which means every time coaches debated whether he deserved playing time, every time depth charts got shuffled, every time a decision about his future potential surfaced, Sanders was simply left unguarded. Without top-down investment, he was easy to sideline, ignore, or discard. And the implications go deeper. Because if ownership isn't aligned with their staff, if the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, the entire development pipeline collapses into chaos. Haslam's casual remark opened the window into an organization running without unity. On a professional level, it was damning. Elite franchises from the Patriots in Brady's era to today's Chiefs operate with one guiding trait: cohesion. Belief starts at the top and trickles down. Players know it, coaches know it, media sees it. In Cleveland's case, Sanders became the unfortunate marker for what happens when cohesion is replaced by division. Stephen A. Smith pounced instantly on Haslam's words. To him, this wasn't just poor communication. This was evidence of intent, or at the very least, a convenient smokescreen for what insiders suspected all along. His accusation was fierce. You were not going to let it happen. Translation? There were voices in the organization determined from the very beginning that Sanders would never be the guy. And Haslam's detachment wasn't innocent. It was compliance. And here's where fans began turning suspicion into outrage. Think about the sequence. A quarterback receives no first-team reps, is tossed into the starting lineup cold, then has question marks thrown at his talent by journalists and coaches alike. Then, days later, the owner casually remarks that he had no stake in bringing the player in. To Cleveland diehards, this wasn't just incompetence. It looked like sabotage. Players aren't developed in such confusion. They're buried by it. Haslam's words did something else too. They reframed Brady and Riddick's criticisms on a larger scale. This wasn't only a coaching issue. It wasn't even just an offensive scheme issue. It was organizational. Sanders wasn't simply underprepared because a single coach neglected him in camp reps. He was underprepared because the leadership structure above the coaches, the one supposed to align vision, accountability, and resources, was fractured from the top down. And that's the true sting of Haslam's revelation. Sanders didn't just arrive without a roadmap. He arrived into a vacuum. No one really claimed his signing. No one stood up publicly and said, "This is our guy. We believe in him. We're going to develop him." Without that commitment, every rep withheld and every late-night depth chart shuffle looked less like oversight and more like design. The narrative left fans with haunting questions. Was Sanders' opportunity ever meant to be real? Was he drafted as a genuine project? Or was he a pawn in a political play between executives and staff? If the owner himself didn't fight to know, how much harder was it for Sanders to fight to prove? For many, this was the breaking point. Media started framing Cleveland less as a team in transition and more as a team in dysfunction. Talking heads didn't just blame Stefanski or the QB coach anymore. They pointed straight past the sideline boxes into the owner's suite. Because once ownership is complicit in a lack of clarity, accountability dissolves. And when accountability dissolves, player development turns into roulette. As one national columnist wrote, when your quarterback isn't just battling defenses, but also battling organizational disinterest, the odds aren't against him. They're fatal. And for Sanders, fatal odds became the uncomfortable truth. By now, it's obvious that Shedeur Sanders' rocky start isn't just about Cleveland's coaching staff fumbling the playbook or Jimmy Haslam shrugging off accountability. His story is bigger than one depth chart or one preseason rollout. It is the latest example of a cycle that has repeated itself across the NFL for years, where talented young quarterbacks are judged under impossible conditions, while the very people responsible for developing them often skate free of criticism. This is the broken system Tom Brady was talking about. His remarks weren't meant as a clever soundbite. They were an indictment of how the league operates when it comes to nurturing its most important position. And when you step back, the pattern is impossible to deny. Look across the past 2 decades. For every Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, or Josh Allen who has blossomed into a franchise savior, there are far more names we barely remember. Quarterbacks drafted with promise who burned out quickly and quietly. Critics call them busts. Fans write them off as overhyped. But are they all busts? Or were they players swallowed up by the machinery of poor coaching, inconsistent systems, and organizational agendas that never aligned? Brady's argument cuts through that narrative. Quarterbacks don't magically fail. They fail in environments where the support structure isn't designed for sustained growth. They fail in places where reps are inconsistent, schemes are mismatched to their talents, or coaches spend more time protecting their own reputations than developing the roster's future. Sanders became a lightning rod precisely because his case highlighted all these cracks at once. No consistency in reps, no first-team opportunities, no clear advocate inside the organization, ownership freely admitting they didn't know who even pushed for his signing. For Brady, Stephen A. and Riddick, Sanders isn't just one player in trouble. He's the perfect case study of why accountability in football remains so lopsided that it threatens entire careers. And here's what makes the problem sting even more. The NFL knows how fragile quarterback development can be. It's been proven countless times. Teams invest millions into scouting, analytics, and performance labs, all in pursuit of finding the next franchise cornerstone. But if that player walks into a fractured coaching system or a divided front office, all that investment evaporates. Sanders shows how fast it can unravel. A rookie treated as disposable before even being given a fair stage. Now, critics might argue, but shouldn't players overcome adversity? Isn't it their job to fight through obstacles? To some extent, yes. The league is absolutely about resilience, and the best quarterbacks are mentally tough. But Riddick's point remains unshakable. Resilience doesn't replace structure. Even the most determined player cannot thrive without reps, without advocacy, and without a system that puts them in a position to succeed. Expecting them to excel in the absence of those support systems isn't tough love. It's sabotage disguised as challenge. The bigger picture here? This is not a Cleveland problem. It is an NFL problem. It's systemic. Coaches are promoted without proven track records of grooming quarterbacks. Owners delegate responsibilities without ensuring aligned visions. Slow starts by young signal callers are pinned entirely on the player's skill, while the unqualified or outdated methods surrounding them remain untouched. If Sanders hadn't voiced his frustration through his play, and if legends like Brady hadn't called it out, the same cycle would spin quietly on. Fans sense this too. That's why Sanders' battle hits a nerve that transcends stat sheets. It resonates because everyone watching knows how often promising players have been chewed up and spat out by this league. Careers end quietly, while coordinators move to new cities, keeping paychecks and reputations intact. That's the imbalance Brady raged against. That's the imbalance Sanders is living through right now. And if nothing changes, this imbalance will keep erasing futures. In sports, we love simple narratives: the hero, the villain, the underdog who triumphs. But the NFL's quarterback pipeline is far murkier. Sanders' trajectory shows us that sometimes the villain isn't a rival defense at all. Sometimes the villain is the system itself: mismanaged practice reps, muddled chains of command, and the accountability void above young talent. The warning couldn't be clearer. Until the NFL addresses this broken development culture, no amount of talent will guarantee success. Sanders just happens to be the one carrying the weight of proof right now. But his struggle symbolizes many before him, and, unless reforms happen, many after. So when fans ask, why isn't Shedeur Sanders thriving? The harder question we should all be asking is, why isn't the system designed to let him thrive in the first place? By now, one thing is impossible to ignore. Shedeur Sanders' story isn't just about a quarterback fighting for snaps. It's about an entire industry refusing to hold itself to the same standards it demands from its youngest stars. And if you trace the arc of this saga, from Tom Brady's bombshell commentary to Stephen A's outrage to Louis Riddick's forensic breakdown, all the way to Jimmy Haslam's careless remarks, a single word rises to the top: accountability. Or more accurately, the lack of it. Think about the gauntlet quarterbacks are forced to run. Every drive is graded, every completion percentage dissected, every regression turned into a segment for national television. One bad game snowballs into endless debates about whether he's really the guy. This is the world Sanders walked into, one that magnifies failure with no patience for context. Fans demand results immediately. Analysts circle mistakes like vultures. Even franchises with decades of failure at the position pin salvation to a rookie's shoulders, then shrug when it didn't work out. But now pull back and ask, who critiques the coaches building these systems? Who grades their game plans? Who questions whether the quarterback coach even understands player development beyond cliches? The uncomfortable answer, as Brady and Riddick laid bare, is almost no one. Unlike quarterbacks, coaches aren't ranked week to week. They aren't dissected under fire on social platforms. And ownership, as Haslam revealed far too casually, often washes its hands of player development entirely, outsourcing the future of a multi-billion-dollar franchise to staff with barely a track record of success. That's the broken loop. That's the cycle that creates cautionary tales like Sanders. Coaches mismanage the foundation. Owners fail to unify vision. Players like Sanders take the field under impossible circumstances, stumble, and then carry the scarlet letters of not good enough. Meanwhile, the architects of those struggles keep paychecks, keep control, and keep dodging the. And that's why Sanders' struggle resonates far louder than a preseason storyline. He has become more than a quarterback. He has become the flashlight revealing cracks in the walls of the NFL's most important position pipeline. His lack of first-team reps, his absence of advocates, the public exposure of disorganization at the top, all of it makes one thing crystal clear. The system isn't just failing him. The system, left unchecked, is designed to fail a lot of quarterbacks before they even get the chance to grow. So where does the NFL go from here? Do we keep pretending that quarterback busts are always about lack of talent or weak work ethic? Or do we start acknowledging that maybe the league itself creates busts by starving players of the support required to develop? Brady's voice matters because he took the most difficult position in sports and mastered it for 20 years. If he's warning that too many quarterback coaches don't know what they're doing, how many careers have already been lost in that gap between perception and reality. And what about ownership? Haslam may have thought his admission was harmless, just a casual dismissal of his own role in a draft decision. But what it revealed was something far uglier: a lack of stewardship at the very top. True accountability begins with leadership. When leaders check out, when commitment is absent, when no one takes responsibility for the development of their most important investments, organizations don't build dynasties. They build dysfunction. That brings us back to Sanders. He was never simply a rookie fighting for his shot. He was, from day one, fighting uphill against an ecosystem uninterested in his success. His story shouldn't just be framed as one player's bad break. It should be the case study the NFL uses when it finally admits that quarterback development cannot be left so haphazard, so political, so careless. Because when the system fails, it doesn't just waste talent, it wastes years, it wastes fan hope, and it wastes the very foundation of competitiveness the league thrives on. The solution isn't complicated. Coaches need to be evaluated with the same rigor they demand of players. Ownership needs to take responsibility for aligning visions across their organizations. And young quarterbacks desperately need advocates willing to fight for consistent reps, patient growth, and systems tailored to elevate their strengths instead of magnify their flaws. Until the NFL takes those steps, Sanders' story will repeat itself again and again under different names in different cities. Players will keep being asked to carry blame that isn't theirs to carry. Fans will keep burying quarterbacks as underachievers when in truth, they were casualties of malpractice from the top down. Shedeur Sanders may or may not rise from this chaos to seize a starting role long term. That remains uncertain. But what is certain is this: he has become the undeniable proof that the accountability vacuum in professional football is real, dangerous, and overdue for exposure. He is no longer just one rookie quarterback on the Cleveland Browns. He is the reminder that talent dies without vision, and that no team, no matter how talented its roster may be, can win if accountability flows only one way. So the question is no longer, can Sanders succeed? The question is, can the NFL finally fix a system that sets players up to fail before they even get started?